Hello, everybody. This is Paul Nison with Torah Life Ministries. Thank you for joining me this morning. We are going to continue reading the Bible live every single day. And right now, we are going to read Genesis chapter 41. If you want to turn there, Genesis chapter 41 in your Bibles. And we're reading the story of Joseph. And the last time we saw Joseph, he was in the dungeon, in the jail in Egypt. And him being Hebrew, I want to discuss a couple of things here with this situation that people might not think of. Before we get into the story of Joseph, I want to explain that there are a lot of people that don't put themselves in the position of the Bible and they don't understand. For one thing, for example, we take the Apostle Paul. His greatest desire was to go to Rome and preach the gospel to the Emperor of Rome. And we hear Rome, we think of it something like a destination place, a vacation or something like this, but it wasn't. It was a very evil place at that time, and Paul was looking to go there. And so there are many situations where we need to put ourselves in. That's like me saying my greatest destination is to go to ISIS and preach to the king there or the leader of ISIS, and people would tell me I was crazy. But if I say Rome, people say, well, that's not too bad, because our concept is of the time today, not of the time back then. And you have to understand the situation Joseph is in. I mean, he was taken from his family, literally kidnapped. Yes, his brother sold him into slavery, but it is the same equivalent of kidnapped. If we hear the story on the news today of some young girl being swooped up out of a home, or even if a father sells her into, we can call it, say, sex slavery, or slavery of hard labor or something else. Do you understand how the news would react to something like that? Or if a young son, a 17-year-old son, was sold by his brothers or his father to go be a slave in a foreign land and work as a slave, the uproar that there would be of how vile of a thing this is, and that it happened to Joseph. See, when you got to put yourself in the situation that they were in. Another thing is the language. Now, Joseph was a 17-year-old boy when he was taken. I hardly doubt that he knew the language they were speaking there in Egypt. And so it wasn't just the culture and everything else, but the language and everything. He had to figure out how to get by. Now, being in jail all those years and being around the Egyptians all those years, very smart man. I'm sure he learned their language enough to communicate with them, but completely taken out of his culture and into this place. Now we turn our attention towards Egypt, and we see Egypt, and we hear Egypt, and we think about Egypt today. And yes, it's not the same vacation destination as a place like Rome, but it's certainly not a comfortable place today. But it was completely different back then. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily compare it to ISIS today, but I would compare it today to a place as back then. You're either in great favor with the king, or you're an outcast and you're thrown in the dungeon. Not a good place you want to be. You hear about some people, and I would equate it today to hear about some African countries and African nations today, where how the jail system is out there, or even you look at China and North Korea and places like that. So let's use North Korea as an example. I would equate Egypt back then to North Korea today. You had a king or a leader who was in charge of everything. His word was final, and what he said happened. There's no voting of people under him. What he said happened. And a lot of hard labor going on in their jails over there and things like that. Basically, it wasn't a good place. It wasn't a place where you wanted to be. And there's no escape. There's no, oh, I'm going to get out of here. So that's like where you're looking at when you think about Egypt, and here Joseph is in this place. So think about your son, or you being a young man being sold into slavery and shipped over to Korea, not Korea, let's say North Korea, and here he is, and in this situation. So what's to be done? What's to be done? And now when we think about that, we could think about the plague maybe that Joseph was in more of the situation he was in. And so as he's in this situation, we continue reading because now he's already messed up. Because first he got an opportunity. He was somewhat rescued, say, instead from hard labor and going to jail, because he was a young man and he had some muscles built on him. So he was bought and to be sold into being work. I would say I wouldn't necessarily call it hard labor like they would have in a jail, but he was working in the house of a very rich man, Potiphar, and so he had somewhat of a luxury life compared to the people in jail. But then circumstances happen where he stays righteous in the circumstances, and then he gets thrown into a dungeon, pretty much a really vile prison, which waiting to see what would happen. And sometimes nothing ever happened. How long would he be there? Sometimes he would rot there and die there, maybe the people would. But we get into chapter 41 because we see in the last chapter of 40, Joseph interprets the dreams of the baker and the drink bearer, and he says, "Please let them know that I told you this dream," and they don't. 2 years goes by, nothing. But Joseph stays righteous. He stays sane, which is important, and he stays, I'm sure, knowing that Yahweh is with him. And here he is in the jail, looking like a Hebrew. You know, he has his clothes. I'm sure one set of clothes, they're pretty dirty, but he has a nice long beard, a nice, beautiful long beard. And here he is in charge of these prisoners and everything else. But then it says, and it happened at the end of 2 years of days, Pharaoh was dreaming, and lo, he was standing by the river. And behold, and the river that he was standing by was the Nile River, just so you know. That's the interpretation of what it would be. And behold, 7 cows were going up the river. So he was dreaming and he was standing by the river. So remember, he had a dream, and in the dream, he was by a river. So he wasn't literally standing by the river. In a dream, he was by the river. 7 cows were going up from the river, beautiful of appearance and fat of flesh, and they were eating in the reeds. And behold, 7 other cows were going up after from the river, evil of appearance and lean in flesh, and they were standing beside the cows on the lip of the river. And the evil appearing and lean flesh cows were eating the 7 cows of beautiful and fat appearance. And Pharaoh awoke. So this is a very weird dream that he didn't know what was going on. And when it was a weird dream, it was a very peculiar situation where you had cows eating cows and so on. And he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain. Now, some translations will say 7 ears of corn. There was no corn in Egypt like at that time. They were grain, 7 ears of grain. And some people call it, well, let's see, it says, usually translated, serve. Joseph, no, that's not it. Let's see, verse 41. While commonly translated as corn, there was no corn in the Middle East at this time. This refers to the grains common to that area, such as barley and wheat. So that's what they had at that time. And he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain were coming up on the stalk, fat and good. And behold, 7 ears of grain being lean and blasted by the east wind, sprouting forth after them. And the 7 lean years was swallowing the 7 fat and full ears. And Pharaoh awakened, and behold, it was a dream. So that's his second dream. He had 2 dreams. And it happened in the morning, his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dream, and there was no interpreter of them to Pharaoh. So there's actually people that had this position of interpreting dreams, or doing other black magic and things like this. And Pharaoh called for them to come, and he got them all there, and he asked them this. Now, when it says, and there was no interpreter of the dream to Pharaoh, there actually were most likely interpreters of the dream that did not meet Pharaoh's satisfaction. Whether some people said, well, you're going to have 7 daughters, or you're going to have this, and so on. None of them Pharaoh was satisfied with. And then the chief cupbearer spoke with Pharaoh, saying, I mentioned my sin today. And Pharaoh was angry against his servants and gave, and so now the chief cupbearer is taking a real chance, putting his neck on the line here, to either be held up a high esteem, or to be put back in a dungeon. Because if Joseph was a dud and wasn't true to what was going to happen, this cupbearer pretty much might have been putting his life on the line by even mentioning something like this. But he says, Pharaoh was angry against his servants and gave me into custody in the house of the chief of the executioners, me and the chief of the bakers. And we dreamed the dream in one night, and he and I, and we each dreamed according to the interpretation of a dream. And a Hebrew youth was with us, a slave to the chief of the executioners, or as it properly translated, maybe a servant, and not even a servant, somebody who was in charge there. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams to us. He interpreted to each according to his dream. And it happened as he has interpreted to us. So it was. He returned me to my position, and he hanged him. And Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. And so now the cupbearer finally speaks up after 2 years. And this is how somebody's life can change immediately, like overnight. You could be at the lowest of lows, in a dungeon, in a pit of life, everything going against you, and within a couple of hours, you're the leader of the whole land. In an instant, things can change. Yahweh can do that, so never give up or doubt Yahweh. So verse 14, and Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they rushed him from the dungeon. So here Joseph was just hanging out, doing what he was getting used to, fitting in. And next thing you know, it says they shaved and changed his clothes and came into Pharaoh. So now we get into something to stop and think about that for a second. It says, and he shaved and changed his clothes and came to Pharaoh. Now, I don't know if he did this voluntarily or not, or they literally held him down and shaved him and ripped off his clothes and put new clothes on him, or if he voluntarily did it. There's no thing here recorded that said Yahweh came to Joseph the night before and said, this is what's going to happen tomorrow, and this is what you are to do. No, you had him in this dungeon, this evil dungeon, and then you had these evil servants of Pharaoh come in, grab him out of his cell, and I would think it was a pretty hostile thing. You're getting up and you're moving now, and you're coming to front of Pharaoh now. Just like if they were in North Korea and in the cell, and all of a sudden the king calls, and they're ripping him out of his cell and ripping off his clothes and putting something on him that looks half decent and shaving him up. I don't believe Joseph went and did this on his own, but very well he might have. He might have played along and said, okay, I'm going to do my best to put myself in the best position to get out of here. They handed me this razor blade. They gave me these clothes so I can look like an Egyptian. If I go in front of Pharaoh like this, he might not even take me seriously. So we'll see here. We'll keep reading. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have a dream. I have dreamed a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. And I have heard about you, saying you hear a dream to interpret it. And Joseph replied to Pharaoh, saying, not I. Yahweh will answer the peace of Pharaoh. So Joseph again does a great thing here, and he gives the reverence, just like he did when he was being seduced or chased by Potiphar's wife. How can I sin and do this evil thing against Yahweh? And here again, he gives it to Yahweh. He goes, Yahweh will interpret the dream. For I am just a boy. How can I interpret this? Just a man. But Yahweh, has the opportunity and the power to interpret this and to give you peace and to take away your troubles. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, and Joseph completely ignores, Pharaoh completely ignores Joseph's reply that it's God. And remember, this is a God that went against all the Egyptian gods. And he's saying, I will not interpret it, but Yahweh will interpret it and give you peace. And Pharaoh just goes right into the dream. He says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, lo, I was standing on the lip of the river, and behold, 7 cows were going up from the river, fat of flesh and beautiful of form, and were feeding the reeds. And behold, 7 other cows were going up after them, poor and very evil of form, and lean of flesh. I have not seen any like them in all the land of Egypt, for badness. And the cows, the lean and the evil, ate the first 7 cows. Cows eating cows. Now, if you think about this wild and crazy dream, cows don't eat animals, folks. And here you got cows eating cows. And the cows of the lean and evil ate the first 7 cows. And they went in their stomachs, and it could not be seen that they had gone into their stomachs. And their appearance was as evil as the beginning. And I awoken. So he wants to know what this dream is and what's happening now. And I looked in my dream, and behold, 7 ears of grain were coming up on one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withhold lean, blasted by the east wind, sprouting forth after them. And the lean ears were swallowing the 7 ears, good ears. And I spoke to the magicians, but not one making known the meaning to me. And Joseph immediately knows what's going on, and he holds back nothing. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. Elohim Yahweh has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are the 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and evil appearing cows going up after them, they are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blistered by the east wind, will be 7 years of famine. That is the word that I spoke to Pharaoh, that Yahweh is about to do. He has made Pharaoh see. Behold, 7 years of great plenty are coming in the land of Egypt, and 7 years of famine will arise after them, and all the plenty of the land of Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will consume the land, and the plenty of the land will not be remembered because of the famine afterwards, for it will be very severe. And as to the dream being repeated to Pharaoh twice, the thing is settled because it is from Yahweh, and Yahweh has hastened to it. And so now Joseph interprets his dream, and Yahweh gives him the dream. It didn't say Joseph prayed and thought about it for a couple of weeks. No, right away Yahweh gives it to him. And now Joseph gives the advice. Now here's where Joseph's wisdom comes in. Joseph could have simply said, well, that's the dream. Now send me back to the dungeon and let me do my thing and grow my beard back and be in peace. But no, Joseph doesn't. Remember, Joseph is standing in front of this evil, wicked king. And what does he say now? He says, now let Pharaoh look for a man who's intelligent and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. See, the dream was over. Now Joseph's giving his advice. Joseph is advising the king, telling the king what to do. May be worthy of death if the king looks at it that way. You're telling me what to do? Put him to death. But no, he says, and Joseph says, and now let Pharaoh look for a man who's intelligent and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh act and let him appoint new rulers over the land and take 1/5 of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. And let them gather all the food of these coming good years, and let them heap up grain under Pharaoh's hand and food in the cities, and let them keep it. And let the food be for a store for the land, and for 7 years of famine, which will be in the land of Egypt, and let not the land be cut off by famine. So Joseph gives his advice of how to handle the situation, and this is setting up right here the meeting of Joseph and his brothers later on. Remember, Joseph, he's here with the complete appearance of an Egyptian now. He's clean shaven. He has Egyptian clothes on. And Pharaoh goes to even make this even more to make him appear as an Egyptian. It says in verse 37, and the word was good in Pharaoh's eyes and in the eyes of the servants. So they were seeing what was happening here. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find any man like this in whom the spirit of Yahweh is in? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, since Yahweh has taught you all this, there is no one wise and intelligent like you. And he said, since God has taught you this, maybe not knowing his name, since Elohim has taught you this, he knew it was the God of Joseph and not the God of Egypt. No one else had this connection there at this time. It says, no one is wise and intelligent like you. And then verse 40, one of the most profound statements in all of Scripture that people just simply overlook. They just read it and move on. But this is so powerful. This is Yahweh moving completely. So Yahweh could have hardened Pharaoh's heart. And when that happens, all common sense goes out the window. Just like he did with Moses in Egypt and everything that was happening there. But what does he say? He says in verse 40, you shall be over my house, and at your mouth shall be ordered all my people. Only in respect to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, I set you over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it on the hand of Joseph. And he clothed him with fine linen robes and put golden chains on his neck. And he caused him to ride in the chariot, which was the second to him. And they cried before him. And it goes on to say, bow knee and put him over all the land of Egypt. Now, I don't know what happened, if there was a previous person in this position or not, but Joseph quickly overtook that position, and now he put himself in this miraculous position. And we, as we go, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without a word from you, not a man shall lift up his hand or his foot in the land of all of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph by the name of Tisphana, Pina, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, for a wife. And Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Now, can you imagine that night, Joseph being alone with Yahweh, just in awe of what just happened? So not only did he get the ring, the signet ring, and be made second in charge, now he also got a new name, an Egyptian name, and he also got an Egyptian wife. Now, according to Scripture, Joseph was never had a wife and was never with a woman before, and now he has an Egyptian wife. And for Pharaoh to do all this and then give Joseph the wife of another officer of an Egyptian, this is all pretty miraculous stuff that Yahweh's in the works here. But I would say this is just as miraculous as the parting of the Red Sea. When you think about how where Joseph was and what he just got, it was almost like he won the lotto or something all of a sudden, and now he's no longer a poor man. Now he's a rich man. But Joseph knew where his real wealth came from, and so on, and his true identity. Even though his out of appearance was changed, he still stuck to his true identity. But he has all this now. And let me look here when it says and discuss what it says. The daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So that's who the wife was given. And it's very interesting to note that when Joseph was a servant, he was a servant in an officer whose house was named Potiphar. And now he's given a daughter of Potiphar. And this so-called Potiphar said he was the priest of On, where the other one wasn't the priest of On. The other officer was a different officer, not a priest. But some people are to the belief, and I'm of the belief, that this daughter that was given to Joseph to be his wife was of the same Potiphar. And Joseph actually knew the daughter because he was a servant in the house. And Yahweh went and did that. Now, not everyone's under that belief, but I'm under that belief. So Joseph already knew who this daughter was, that he had a choice by Pharaoh to choose the wife of one of these Egyptian officers. And he went right to this girl because he knew who she was, and he knew her well because he was a servant in the house where she most likely was. There's no recording that Potiphar even had a daughter. And there was a daughter in the house. But that's just what I'm under the thought of it possibly being so. But then on the other hand, it could possibly so that it was a completely different Potiphar and completely different daughter that Joseph never met. And that could be as well. But regardless, Joseph has an Egyptian wife. He looks like an Egyptian. And as we see later, his brothers didn't recognize him, and now we know why. And it says, and Joseph was a son of 30 years. And he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the face of Pharaoh and passed over the land of Egypt. So we see him. He comes in at 17 years old, and now he's 30 years old. So now he spent 13 years or 14 years. It'd be in the going through his time in Egypt before he became to this position. But now he's 30 years old, literally with a kingdom in his hand and everything he needed. And Joseph produced by handfuls in 7 years of plenty. And he gathered all of the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt. And he put forth cities, the food of the field, which is around each city, and he put among it. And Joseph heaped up grain like the sand of the sea, exceeding much until he ceased to count it, because it was without number. And 2 sons were born to Joseph before the year of famine came in, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar's priest of On, bore to him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. He called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. For Yahweh has made me forget my toll and all the house of my father. So Joseph hasn't forgotten the house of his father and what happened. He clearly remembered that, as we see later. But he has this son, and he names him Manasseh. Remember, it's by an Egyptian woman that he has this son, and it all goes full circle. Just remember when we had Abraham, and Abraham getting the Egyptian that came out of Egypt with them, and that was the one when Sarah couldn't have a baby. He gave him Hagar, and Hagar had Ishmael, and so now we see here another Egyptian son is born to the great grandson Joseph, and it says, and the name of the second is called Ephraim, for Elohim has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction, and the 7 years of plenty which were in the land were ended. So you have 2 sons. You have the first one, which is Manasseh, and the second one was Ephraim. All right. Now there's so much into these 2 sons that we'll be discussing in the future when it comes to the tribes and the lineage and so on. But we're just reading the story from Genesis in the beginning and going through, doing our best not to get ahead of ourselves here. We'll be reading it every day and continue to read it every day. But we're going to hear a lot about those 2 sons. But just remember, the first was Manasseh, and then Ephraim being the second, in verse 54. And the 7 years of famine began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the famine was in all the lands, But in all the lands of Egypt, there was bread or there was food because of Joseph's plan. And all the land of Egypt hungered, and the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all Egypt, "Go to Joseph, what he says to do." Now, this was a pretty amazing event that had happened of what Joseph had prophesied and it come true. And it's many years later that this event was forgotten in Egypt when they tried to oppress the Israelites. We'll get to that in the future. But right now, everyone knew who Joseph was. He was in charge, and his prophecy was coming through. Verse 56, and the famine was in the face of all the land, not just Egypt, but all the land. And Joseph opened all which was in them, and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was strong in the land of Egypt. So he was selling to not only Egyptians, he was selling to the whole world, all of the land at that time. And the earth came to Egypt, and all the earth came to Egypt to buy to Joseph, for the famine was strong in all the land. So we see Yahweh's plan coming into fruition now, and when his brothers are going to come into the land, and then we're going to see the future stuff that happens with the Israelites. Then we'll get to Moses. But it's all coming into play now, and this is why it's so important to read the Bible from the beginning, to know it, to go all the way through. You have to really understand it and get to the beginning. And this is how you understand Yeshua later on when we read the renewed covenant. This is how you understand what the true words really mean when we say the guidelines and instructions, or the foundation of all scripture, the Torah, and not just some books of an Old Testament that are done away with. Hallelujah. So we'll be reading that. Tomorrow we'll be reading chapter 42 of Genesis. Thank you for joining me this morning. Everybody have a blessed day out there today. We'll try to get on tomorrow around the same time here, and we'll get on at some point. Either way, share this with others, please, on Facebook and YouTube, and let them know we're on here every day reading this, the Bible. And until then, everybody, have a blessed day. And remember, 6 things we need to do as believers: pray, praise, proclaim, read and repent, and submit. Shalom, shalom.